Hi, everyone. My name is Elmira Bayrasli, and I am super excited to be moderating this next section. I hope you've all been enjoying this Youth Progress Summit. Um, and I think it comes at a really important time, just as we have all spent the past year in our respective locations dealing with the COVID-19 crisis, very eager to connect with one another. But I think most importantly to really get on with the work that we had been doing and that we're eager to do. And so I'm super excited to moderate this particular panel of the Youth Progress Summit. We're going to be talking about civil society and civil space, which, as Michael Flattery just pointed out, is absolutely indispensable in every aspect of our functioning societies. In this session, we're going to dive into what's been happening to the civil society space in the past year, and it's a topic that I think is going to be very familiar to everyone tuning in. Starting with how COVID-19 has impacted communities, particularly marginalized groups and minorities. They have been disproportionately impacted, as many of those groups have been frontline workers and been, whether it's at the hospital, transportation workers, getting people around on public transport, or delivering goods and services. And it's also shown a light on the deep systematic inequalities in our society. And a number of our panelists are very familiar with that topic and have really been diving into that in their work. COVID restrictions also have limited people's capacity to meet and mobilize, which has very much limited civil society gatherings. And that's contributed to a further growing global trend of a shrinking of civil society space, and we're going to explore that. So how can youth-driven social movements become the change that we need for future generations? While we're seeing governments restrict movement and in some places restrict civil society space altogether, and how have COVID and related measures contributed to further restrictions on young people's ability to mobilize for social causes? And to answer that, we've got a really great panel. I am so excited. I know, Shari, I just saw your tweet. I'm excited. I woke up excited too. Shari Davis is coming to us from Oakland. I think you're coming to us from Oakland. Yes, Shari?
That's right.
Shari is the co-executive director of a really wonderful organization, the Participatory Budgeting Project, which also has offices here where I am in Brooklyn, New York. So I'm super excited to get to know this organization much better. The Participatory Budgeting Project empowers people to decide together how to spend public money. And this is really, I mean, when I heard about this, I thought this is a wonderful effort. It creates and supports participatory budgeting processes that deepen democracy, build stronger communities, and make public budgets more equitable and effective. We are also joined by Matjaž Gruden. Am I saying that correctly? Oh, good. I got it. I nailed it. I've been practicing all morning. Who is the director of democratic participation at the Council of Europe, and I think that should be a familiar organization to all of us. It was founded in the wake of World War II to uphold human rights, democracy, and the rule of law in Europe. And we're also joined by Yasmine Ouirhrane, who is the founder of We Belong in Europe, which is a platform and podcast series that amplifies the voice of the new daughters of Europe and young women with immigrant backgrounds. So if you're on your phones, get on and make sure that you subscribe to her podcast. But I'd love to kick off the discussion by looking at what has been. Oh, and Darius, you are joining us. Wonderful. I'm so happy to have you here. We're also joined by We're also joined by Darius Baxter, who is the president and CEO of GOODProjects.
Hey, everyone.
GOODProjects is based in Washington, D.C., and it is focused on basically eliminating any roadblocks to any basic needs for families and young people, so that they can actually go out there and make progress and live their lives free from poverty, and helping them have that growth mindset. Wonderful to have you, Darius.
It's an absolute pleasure. And I guess it speaks to all the many different people that you all have gathered here today. I realize we had some time zone differences, but I'm glad to be able to join you all. I'll be able to stay for a few minutes, but I'm really excited to be here. Thank you all so much for the invite.
Great. So Darius, if you aren't able to stay with us, maybe we can start with you. It's because you're working in the space of poverty and economic inequality. We're seeing a lot of changes, and we're seeing how that gap is dividing between rich and poor, even far before the COVID-19 crisis. Can you talk about how it's impacted your work on helping young people and families in the Washington, D.C. area?
Well, I think that's a great question, and thank you so much for leading off with that. I think for a lot of organizations, right, and this is not a knock, but one of the reasons I get invited to these things is because I shoot it straight. You know, for a lot of organizations, am I amongst family and friends? Are we talking straight here today?
Absolutely, talk straight. I'm a straight talker. I'm from New York.
Okay, well, you know, even pre-pandemic, I think the social impact space just as a whole has always done a great job of making excuses. And one of my idols, mentors, advocates, I look to Jeffrey Canada, and the work that he did in the Harlem Children's Zone is really the exception to the rule when it comes to the social impact space. And this quote that he said, it always stuck with me and inspires the work that I do. He said, "Education is the only billion-dollar industry that's failing and still gets funded year over year over year." And I heard that and I was like, well, damn, he's right. He's absolutely right. It's like almost like philanthropy, social impact just gets a pass. And so here we were in the midst of a global pandemic where people were losing jobs at record rates, where people were unable to have access to food, where people were losing their homes, clearly where a disease was running rapid in low-income communities, and even greater effect on low-income communities of color, and where you saw sort of investment in philanthropy skyrocket. But at the same time, you also saw the actual organizations that should have been running to the fire. Everybody went into strategic planning mode. And so for GOODProjects, it was important for us that, yeah, we, like most, if not all other organizations, we went into a strategic planning mode. And at the same time, we understood that there was immediate need that needed to be met. And we went above and beyond to do that. Where across the board, when I look at social impact and I look at philanthropy, I didn't necessarily see that same thing outside of, a few big 5 to 10 organizations. But now as we roll out of the pandemic, and I'll end on this point, my hope will be that all of the strategic planning that has really taken place over the last year and a half, we can start to see the benefits of it, particularly when it comes to young people and young people of color.
Great. Thank you, Darius. Shari, I want to bring you in since you work specifically on budgeting. And as we've seen, many people, budgets have been cut. A lot of cities and communities have lost tax resources. Unemployment has been very high. Your organization is very much focused on deciding how public funds are going to be spent in various communities. How has the COVID-19 pandemic impacted the work that you're doing?
Well, first of all, let me just say, excited to be here. And if you see me squinting or frowning, it's because it happens to be very sunny in California at this moment in time. So it's not true. It's like a really good problem to have if I'm squinting into the camera.
I'm jealous. I wish I could spread it around, y'all.
But to answer your question, when we talk about budgets, especially in instances where resources are finite, when things get tough, I think that the question I heard was, how has our work been impacted? And maybe one thing to make really clear is that the Participatory Budgeting Project, we don't decide how funds are spent. We support a framework that allows people, community members, to really lean into their voice, speak forward what issues they're facing, and then actually engineer solutions that would meet their needs based on their expertise, their lived experience. So the work that we do at the Participatory Budgeting Project is really challenging the system to consider a different way of budgeting, to consider a different way of making decisions, and to really value the lived experience, expertise, and the impact of what community-driven decision-making can do to solve really complex problems. Now, in this moment of COVID, financial constriction, and budget cuts, I understand that many people can hear things like participatory budgeting and say, well, that sounds like a nice thing to do when you have a surplus of funds. But I actually think it's really important when there are finite and limited resources. What better way to make sure that spending is efficient, is going to have a huge impact, than making sure that community members are able to identify, kind of dictate community spending priorities so that we can map those onto government spending priorities and make tough decisions together. And I think that the way that our work has really changed at this moment is really around framing for root causes, really around this comment that I heard before, that like young people, community members are not future leaders, they're leaders now. In the world, the radical, imagined world that we're talking about, we can live in it now, and we can make some decisions right now. And so whether that means with COVID, really thinking about direct cash support, how we mobilize dollars to people that need them at a specific moment, whether that looks like a broader recovery plan and how we make sure that there's an opportunity for bottom-up decisions so that communities' needs are met. Those are some of the ways that our work is pivoting. And I'll just say that when it comes to young people, I'm seeing a lot of young people actually in school systems really consider what it looks like to be able to make some decisions, not only about what their school day looks like, but about how resources support their joy at school, their health at school, and how we can engineer, how they can engineer decisions like that. Look at Brooklyn, where you are, where there's a safe schools participatory budgeting process, where high school students are determining what they need to keep them safe. And then there's a pot of funds, over $500,000, that they decide on so that funds are spent to meet their needs in terms of safety. And so that's the kind of movement that I think we're seeing right now across the United States, but I think globally.
Great. Thank you so much, Shari. Matjaž, I want to bring you into this discussion from the institutional point of view. Shari just talked about young people and decision-making. Are there working best practices on facilitating genuine youth participation in decision-making processes, especially since you've seen it from the Council of Europe perspective?
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for having me. And I just want to say that also I am also really very, very excited to be with you. Can you hear me? I had some problems. Excellent. To be with some really exceptional people. I looked up some of the things that you're doing, and I'm really humbled, really honored to be here with you. I may be squinting as well because there is sunny also here in Eastern France, but Shari, I tell you, it's no California, so I'm also jealous, even with sunshine. I'm coming from the Council of Europe. It's an intergovernmental organization. It's bringing back together 47 governments that agreed to a set of rules, legally binding rules, and if they do not respect them, citizens can take them to a court, which is just here across the street, and that's a great thing. Now, in order to do that, I will respond to your question, and it will not take too long. In order to do that, there are certain things that they are not allowed to do, that they should refrain from doing. Violate human rights, civic rights, political freedoms. And then there's the whole other segment that is important, and that is certain things they should do, creating conditions in which those rights that they have commit themselves to respect can be enjoyed. And what I do in the organization, I'm the director of democratic participation, is being responsible for activities that are largely devoted to that, creating an environment in which the European Convention of Human Rights can be fully enjoyed by the European citizens. And of course, a very important part of that is the youth work and youth cooperation, our youth activities. We have 40 years of experience of a good practice, I can say, in the organization itself. It's going to be 40 years that we have something which we call co-management, which means that representatives of youth organizations, different youth organizations in Europe, are participating in the decision-making on the policies, youth-related policies in the organization. So that in itself, I think it's an example of good practice, and it's something that we are trying to encourage member states and support them in introducing also at local and national levels. Now, the difficulty, of course, right now is that when it comes to the circumstances and respect for commitments to this organization, we are facing difficulties both when it comes to the things that governments should not do and to the things that they should be doing. We have problems on both sides of this equation, and it's really affecting our capacity and the situation in which young people are living in Europe and can be participating even in the examples of the best practice that exist. And it's serious. It's something that, of course, got worse with COVID. This was already mentioned, but it did not start with COVID. I mean, COVID put some things on steroids. It accelerated and aggravated some trends that existed before. We've seen things that were happening and were preoccupying that were happening years ago, the trends that accelerated and affected, again, as it is very often the case, disproportionately young people in particular. So this is a concern. What we're trying to do is to respond to that through the concrete policy measures that we recommend to our governments. We are having specific guidance that is being discussed, but needs to be approved by governments that will be sent there. But as I said, it is sometimes an uphill battle because the environment in which we work here in Europe, but I think it's something that will, of course, also have relevance for also you on the other side in the United States. The environment is deteriorating, and that again is affecting the situation of young people and their possibility, their opportunities that they have to participate meaningfully in decision-making that affects them.
Great. And for our audience, please use the hashtag #AskYouthProgress if you want to get a question in. We don't have a whole lot of time, but I did want to pick up on something, Matjaž, that you said, how COVID has put the problems that had existed previously on steroids. And I think that what we've seen, whether it is in the United States or whether it is in Europe, not only is economic inequality a very big challenge, but so is racism and accepting of different communities. So Yasmine, I'd like to actually bring you into the discussion because you work with immigrant groups. You know, I appreciated what Matjaž just said about, you know, governments should create the conditions, but a lot of those conditions are often, you know, lost on immigrant communities. How have you seen immigrant communities in Europe try to you know, advance themselves in Europe, go ahead with the work that they're doing on every front? How have you seen it impact your work?
Absolutely. So as the podcast host at We Belong, first of all, thank you so much for having me here. I'm very happy to join you. But as the podcast host that we belong, I am in charge of interviewing women from all across Europe who have different backgrounds, different stories, different roles that they cover, right? And the common point that I see every time is the discriminations they face, whether they are from Asian backgrounds, whether they are from Afro descendants, or whether they are actually refugees. We have been able to discuss to these women and gather some of these stories, and what we see is often a need for representation, a need for a more mainstream media portraying those stories. And this is why we belong. We want to make sure that, we amplify their voices. And as we call them, for us, they are the new daughters of Europe, but because we want to put the emphasis on the fact that we are also citizens of our respective member states in Europe. Being myself Italian, I want to particularly talk about the Italian context today, because I was lucky enough to be half Italian, so to be born with an Italian citizenship. But there is still a lot of Italian, or people that actually live in Italy, grew up in Italy, and live there for like 18 years, that cannot have access to this citizenship because their parents are not Italian. So there is a need to reform these policies, and for a long time, civil society movements have been asked to reforms in order to give more rights to these young people that actually feel Italian, but they're not enough represented or included also at the political spheres. And we see these pretty much both at the national level, but also at the regional level. I was lucky enough to work with some European institutions, mainly the European Commission, as an appointed expert. And I wish that were more opportunities of this kind given to young people. So moving forward, especially as we think about the importance of civic spaces and including young people in civic spaces, I would say giving them meaningful roles and reflecting on innovation. We are the generation of the fourth industrial revolution, and we are bringing so much potential that can only be exploited if we are truly included and meaningfully included.
Great. We've got about 5 minutes left, and I thought maybe we could do a lightning round as we wrap up and give some advice to the young people out there about how they can participate, whether it's through your organizations or just in general, and give them a sense of direction and hope. Darius, why don't we start with you?
No, thank you. I've just been sitting here, and again, just blessed and honored to be on this panel. God's timing is perfect, and it's not by chance that we ended up here today. I just really want to just say this and implore to the young people that are watching now and they may watch us in the future. It's like, you have to take control of your own education. Like, we live in a time right now where, God bless Uncle Joe and, all the hope and prayers that we've put into him, particularly here in the US, and the influence that we have around the world. But, our education system is abjectly failing young people. It is not providing the skills or the tools to be able to be effective in a global marketplace. It is not giving the skills and the tools to be able to be politically savvy, to be able to manage your own finances. And if you are solely dependent on the 8 to 4 p.m. Monday through Friday education that you are going to receive, and think that that is going to give you what you need to thrive in the country that you will inherit, or the world that you will inherit, then I'm sorry, I'll tell you here straight to your face, like, you're lying to yourself. None of us, and I can say this proudly, and I don't even have to, this is all of our first time connecting. None of us found ourselves here on this panel or doing the great work that we do just solely listening to, our teachers in our classroom. It was going out into the world, exploring and taking control of our education. I'm proud of you all in ways that you can never think or imagine, to already be taking the steps to join events like this. And I would say this is only step one. Keep going. And always, I'm more than happy to make myself available for any of you all.
Great. Thank you, Darius. Shari.
All right, lightning. Darius, I'm gonna try to be faster than you, but you just dropped some real gems there. The advice that I have to the young people listening is you've heard us talk about leadership. We said that young people are not future leaders, they're leaders now. We're talking about you. You are a leader right now. And I think one of the biggest things to understand about leadership is it's not what someone else tells you it is. I believe that really wonderful leaders foster an opportunity for communities to make decisions together. Really great leaders don't make decisions for everyone else. We build a culture of community care. So I think my biggest advice for young people, young leaders, folks that are leaders out there that want to make big systems change is to show up, ask questions, and number one, believe that you are a leader. And I think that's how we begin to see leaderful systems where people make decisions together. It starts with you, the leaders that are out there.
I love that, leaderful. I'm totally going to steal that. I will attribute it to you, but I'm going to steal it. Thank you, Shari. Matjaž.
I don't want to be, I think I'm going to say my advice not to young people because I think they can live without it, but to my generation, and something that reflects what we're really trying to do at the Council of this field. And that is the message that protecting, expanding civic space, creating opportunities, reinforcing opportunities, real opportunities for participation of young people in decision-making, protecting their rights, creating opportunities for youth work, excellent work. It's not something that is important just for young people. Of course it is, but it's an indispensable precondition for us as a society to be able to face the challenges that we have. From climate to social issues, to economic issues, to the digital transformation, everything, you name it, we are simply going to fail miserably if we are not going to have young people at the table looking and deciding and addressing this together. So every way we look at the social products, youth social progress indexes, it's not just measuring the situation of young people across the world, it's really measuring how creative, how progressive, how innovative, and how smart we are as a societies as a whole, or not.
Great. So a message to the leaders out there today, the old people like us, create space for younger people in order to interact and grow. And Yasmine, help us close out our panel.
Well, very good advices from the rest of the panel. So I would conclude maybe saying, especially as we heard before in the previous panel about how much the global pandemic is impacting the future of jobs. Many people might feel stressed about that or might feel anxious about that. I would say make sure that you surround yourself by people that can mentor you, the people that can support your growth in any way, and the online spaces, you can still find opportunities by, just reaching out to the right people. So don't be afraid to go out there and be proactive. And maybe concluding by saying that I'm having a small mentorship program. It's for free that I do on Sunday mornings. So feel free to book that if you need it. And if I can do my share, my little share by helping, it's always a pleasure, and encourage all the people in the panel to do the same, give back as much as we can. But yeah, especially in this time, take care of yourselves and believe in your potential. As Shari said, we are leaderful, so please continue to do so.
Great, wonderful. Thank you, Darius, Shari, Matjaž, and Yasmine. And thank you, Social Progress Index. And congratulations on the launch of the Youth Progress Index. It was a pleasure to have this discussion.